What if I told you that a single drop of blood, overlooked for nearly a decade, just shattered everything we thought we knew about one of America's most haunting disappearances? Have you ever lost someone you love? Have you ever felt that crushing weight of not knowing if they are alive or dead? That suffocating darkness that creeps into your chest every time you see an empty chair at the dinner table? Tonight, we are talking about a case that will make your blood run cold. Two sisters, Emily and Natalie Decker, vanished without a trace on a chilly October evening in the small town of Milford. These were not just any sisters. These were the golden girls of their community, the ones who organized charity bake sales, the ones who lit up every room they entered, the ones who believed they could change the world through kindness. But on that fateful night, they simply disappeared into thin air. For nearly 10 years, their mother Margaret has lived in a nightmare that never ends. 10 years of checking her phone every few minutes, hoping for that call. 10 years of leaving the porch light on, praying they might come home. 10 years of a family torn apart by questions that had no answers. The police searched everywhere. They followed every lead. They interviewed hundreds of people. They combed through forests, dragged ponds, and turned the entire town upside down. But Emily and Natalie Decker seemed to have vanished from the face of the earth. The case went cold. The media moved on. The world forgot about two sisters from a small town in America. But their family never stopped fighting. Their community never stopped hoping. And today, that hope just became reality. Before we reveal this breakthrough that is sending shockwaves through the true crime community, smash that like button if you believe every family deserves answers, because what I am about to tell you proves that justice might be delayed, but it is never denied. You see, sometimes the smallest piece of evidence holds the biggest secret. Sometimes what seems impossible becomes inevitable. Sometimes a single molecule of DNA can bring down an entire web of lies. For Margaret Decker, today started like any other day in her 10-year battle for truth. She woke up in a house that still echoes with the laughter of her missing daughters. She looked at photos that capture smiles frozen in time. She whispered the same prayer she has whispered every morning for 3,650 days. But what happened 5 minutes ago changes everything. The phone call that Margaret received 5 minutes ago will rewrite the entire story of the Decker sisters case. The breakthrough that investigators just announced will finally give this mother the answers she has been desperately seeking for a decade. So buckle up, because tonight we are taking you inside the most shocking development in modern true crime history. To understand the magnitude of what was lost that October night, you need to know who Emily and Natalie Decker really were. You need to understand the life that was stolen from them and the dreams that died with their disappearance. Milford, Illinois was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone. Population 8,043 people, where the high school football games drew the entire community, and the annual corn festival was the highlight of the year. Tree-lined streets stretched in perfect grids, white picket fences bordered well-kept lawns, and children rode their bicycles without fear until the streetlights came on. This was small-town America at its finest. This was where families still gathered on front porches in the evenings, and neighbors brought casseroles when someone was sick. This was where people left their doors unlocked and trusted strangers with directions. Emily Decker was 20 years old, a junior at the local community college studying early childhood education. She had dreams of opening her own daycare center right there in Milford. Emily was the organizer, the planner, the one who could convince anyone to volunteer for any cause. Her friends called her the mother hen because she always made sure everyone got home safely after a night out. She had this infectious laugh that could be heard 3 blocks away. Emily collected vintage postcards and wrote handwritten letters to elderly residents at the nursing home every week. She wanted to travel the world someday, but she also wanted to come back home and make Milford a better place for children to grow up. Natalie was 18, fresh out of high school, and working part-time at the local library while saving money for college. She was quieter than Emily, more introspective, but she had this way of seeing beauty in everything around her. Natalie took photographs constantly, capturing moments that others might overlook. A dewdrop on a flower petal, an elderly man feeding pigeons in the park, children playing hopscotch on the sidewalk. The sisters were inseparable. Psychology tells us that sibling bonds formed in childhood can be some of the strongest relationships humans ever experience. These bonds create a sense of identity, belonging, and unconditional love that shapes who we become as adults. Emily and Natalie had that rare connection where they could communicate without words, finish each other's sentences, and know exactly what the other was thinking. Their parents, Margaret and Robert Decker, had built a life centered around family values. Robert worked at the grain elevator, steady employment that had supported the family for over 2 decades. Margaret was a substitute teacher who volunteered at every school event and church function. Their home on Elm Street was modest, but filled with warmth, laughter, and the kind of memories that make a house into a sanctuary. Family dinners happened every night at 6 o'clock sharp. No phones, no television, just conversation about their days, their dreams, and their plans for the future. Margaret would later tell investigators that those dinner conversations were her favorite part of every day. The sisters volunteered together at the community center every Thursday evening, helping with after-school programs for underprivileged children. They organized clothing drives for families in need and spent weekends helping elderly neighbors with yard work and grocery shopping. Emily and Natalie were not just sisters, they were partners in making their community a better place. But here is what most people do not realize about happiness. It is fragile. Life can change in an instant. The normalcy we take for granted can be shattered without warning. We go to bed one night in a world that makes sense, and we wake up in a nightmare we never saw coming. The psychological concept of normalcy bias explains why we struggle to recognize threats that exist outside our everyday experience. We assume that tomorrow will be like today, that our loved ones will always come home, that bad things happen to other people in other places. The Decker family lived in this bubble of assumed safety. They believed that love and kindness would protect them from the darkness that exists in this world. They trusted their community, their neighbors, and the inherent goodness of humanity. On the morning of October 15th, Margaret made pancakes for breakfast, just like she did every Saturday. Emily complained about her upcoming midterm exams, while Natalie showed everyone her latest photographs. Robert read the newspaper and talked about the weather forecast for the weekend. It was a perfectly ordinary morning in a perfectly ordinary family. None of them knew that by nightfall their world would be destroyed forever. Because beneath this picture-perfect life, something dark was already stirring. Forces beyond their control were moving into position. The predator was already watching, already planning, already preparing to strike. October 15th, 2014, 7 o'clock in the evening. The community center buzzed with activity as volunteers prepared for the monthly charity drive. Emily and Natalie Decker arrived right on schedule, their arms full of donated clothes and their hearts full of hope for helping local families in need. This was their routine. Every third Thursday of the month for the past 2 years, they would spend 3 hours sorting donations, organizing supplies, and preparing care packages for struggling families. It was volunteer work that defined who they were as human beings. 7:30 in the evening, security cameras captured Emily laughing with Mrs. Henderson, the elderly coordinator who had been running these events for over a decade. Natalie was photographing the volunteers in action, documenting their community service for the local newspaper. Everything appeared normal. Everyone seemed happy. 8:15 in the evening. The sisters were seen carrying boxes to the storage room in the back of the building. Multiple witnesses confirmed they were working together, talking quietly, completely unaware that they were being watched, completely unaware that someone had been studying their patterns, their schedule, their vulnerability. 8:45 in the evening, the last confirmed sighting. Emily waved goodbye to Mr. Patterson, the janitor who was locking up the building. Natalie was already walking toward the parking lot, her camera bag slung over her shoulder. They were heading to their car, a red Honda Civic that Robert had helped Emily buy for her 20th birthday. 9 o'clock in the evening, they never made it home. The psychology of missing persons cases reveals a critical truth. Families always know when something is wrong before anyone else does. It is an instinct that cannot be explained, only experienced. A mother's intuition that defies logic but never lies. Margaret Decker felt it first. 9:30 came and went with no phone call. The sisters always called when they were running late. Always. It was a family rule that had never been broken in 20 years. 10 o'clock arrived with crushing silence. Margaret stood at the kitchen window, watching the driveway, willing headlights to appear around the corner. Robert tried to calm her fears, suggesting the car might have broken down, or they might have stopped for coffee with friends. But Margaret knew. Deep in her bones, she knew something terrible had happened. 10:30 brought the first wave of panic. Margaret called Emily's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. She called Natalie's phone. Same result. She called the community center. No answer. She called their friends. Nobody had seen them. 11 o'clock shattered the last fragments of hope. Robert drove to the community center and found their red Honda Civic sitting alone in the parking lot. The doors were unlocked. Emily's purse was on the front seat. Natalie's camera was on the dashboard, but the sisters were nowhere to be found. This is the moment when psychological trauma begins. This is when the human mind starts trying to process the impossible. Robert called Margaret from the empty parking lot, his voice shaking as he described what he was seeing. 2 daughters had simply vanished into the night. 11:15 brought the first call to police. Margaret's trembling fingers dialed 911 as she struggled to form the words that would change everything. "My daughters are missing. They never came home. Their car is at the community center, but they are not there." The dispatcher asked standard questions. How old were they? When were they last seen? Had they been drinking? Had they been fighting with anyone? Did they have boyfriends who might have picked them up? Each question felt like a knife twisting in Margaret's chest. These were not reckless teenagers. These were responsible young women who had never given their parents a single moment of worry. Midnight marked the beginning of the search. Police officers arrived at the community center with flashlights and radios. They searched every room, every closet, every corner of the building. They found nothing. If this case is keeping you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started. What happens next will haunt this family and this community for the next 10 years. 1 o'clock in the morning brought the first search teams. Neighbors joined police officers, dividing into groups to search the surrounding area. They called the sisters' names until their voices became hoarse. They searched behind buildings, in alleys, along the creek that ran behind the community center. 2 o'clock revealed the first clue. A witness remembered seeing a strange vehicle parked near the community center around 8:30, a dark pickup truck that did not belong to any of the regular volunteers. But the witness could not remember the license plate number or any other identifying details. 3 o'clock brought false hope. Someone thought they saw 2 young women walking along Highway 27, several miles from town. Police rushed to the location. It was not Emily and Natalie. 4 o'clock delivered crushing despair. The search teams had covered a 5-mile radius around the community center. They had knocked on doors, searched abandoned buildings, and contacted every hospital within 50 miles. The sisters had simply disappeared. 5 o'clock carried the weight of reality. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, Margaret Decker stood in her driveway, still wearing her pajamas, still hoping for a miracle that would never come. She had not slept, she had not eaten, she had not stopped praying. The life lesson here is critical. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Margaret knew within 30 minutes that her daughters were in danger. She did not waste time making excuses or assuming they were fine. She acted on her maternal instincts and called for help immediately. But even quick action could not change what had already happened. Even the fastest response could not undo the evil that had been committed in those crucial 60 minutes between 8:45 and 9:45. 6 o'clock brought the sunrise that Margaret would later describe as the most beautiful and most terrible she had ever seen. Beautiful because it meant another day to search for her daughters. Terrible because it meant they had been missing for an entire night. By sunrise, Milford would never be the same. Dawn brought more than just sunlight to Milford. It brought the full weight of law enforcement descending on this small town that had never seen anything like this before. Detective Michael Torres arrived at 6:30 in the morning, coffee in hand, expecting to find 2 teenage runaways who would probably turn up by lunch. He was wrong. The first 24 hours of any missing persons investigation are critical. This is when evidence is fresh, when witnesses remember details clearly, when the trail is still warm. But the first 24 hours of the Decker sisters case revealed just how quickly everything can go wrong. The community center became a crime scene, but not before dozens of well-meaning volunteers had already contaminated the area. People had walked through the parking lot, touched surfaces, and moved items before police tape could be erected. The psychological principle of crime scene integrity had been shattered before investigators even arrived. Detective Torres began collecting evidence with the methodical precision of someone who had worked hundreds of cases. But Milford was not Chicago. The local police department had 3 full-time officers and a budget that barely covered basic equipment. They were not prepared for this kind of investigation. The first piece of evidence was a single fiber caught on the door handle of the community center. Under a microscope, it appeared to be cotton blend, dark blue in color, possibly from a work shirt or jacket. But without advanced laboratory analysis, it was just a piece of thread that could have come from anyone. The second piece of evidence was more promising. A partial footprint in the soft dirt behind the building, leading away from the back door toward the parking lot. The print was large, clearly from a man's boot, size 11 or 12. Investigators made a plaster cast, hoping it would eventually match a suspect's footwear. The third piece of evidence was the most frustrating. Security cameras at the community center had recorded everything that happened inside the building, but they did not cover the back door or the parking lot. Hours of footage showed Emily and Natalie working normally, laughing with other volunteers, completely unaware of the danger approaching them. The psychological analysis of failed investigations reveals a disturbing pattern. When law enforcement lacks experience with serious crimes, they often make critical errors in the first few days. Evidence gets overlooked. Witnesses are not interviewed properly. Leads are not followed quickly enough. Detective Torres made his first mistake on day 2. A witness claimed to have seen the sisters getting into a vehicle with 2 men near the highway. Torres spent 18 hours tracking down this lead, only to discover the witness had been drinking heavily and was confusing the Decker sisters with 2 other young women he had seen a week earlier. 18 hours wasted while the real trail grew colder. The community responded with incredible generosity. Over 300 volunteers joined the search efforts, combing through forests, abandoned buildings, and rural areas within a 30-mile radius of Milford. They found old shoes, rusty car parts, and discarded clothing, but they found no trace of Emily and Natalie Decker. Just when hope seemed lost, a new lead emerged. A gas station attendant 20 miles away remembered 2 young women matching the sisters' description, buying snacks around 10 o'clock that night. The security footage was grainy, but it looked promising. Families of missing persons often cling to these moments of false hope like lifelines. The footage was enhanced, analyzed, and studied frame by frame. It was not Emily and Natalie. Another dead end. Another crushing disappointment. The fourth piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. A local farmer found a cell phone in his cornfield, 3 miles from the community center. The phone had been damaged by weather, but technicians were able to retrieve some data. Text messages, call logs, and photos could provide crucial information about the sisters' final hours. The phone belonged to a teenager from the next town over. It had been lost during a party 2 weeks before the sisters disappeared. Another false lead, another wave of despair. The psychological toll on investigators cannot be underestimated. Detective Torres was working 16-hour days, following every tip, pursuing every possibility, but for every step forward he seemed to take 2 steps back. The case was becoming a maze of dead ends and false hopes. The life lesson here is crucial. Proper evidence handling and experienced investigators can make the difference between solving a case and watching it go cold. Small-town police departments need resources, training, and support from state and federal agencies when serious crimes occur. By day 7, the harsh reality was becoming clear. The Decker sisters case was not going to be solved quickly. There would be no dramatic breakthrough, no obvious suspect, no clear motive. This was going to be a long, painful investigation that would test everyone involved. The media attention was beginning to fade. The volunteers were returning to their normal lives. The massive search efforts were being scaled back. Detective Torres was facing the possibility that Emily and Natalie Decker had become another unsolved case in his files. The moment everyone realizes this would not be quick came during a press conference on day 10. Detective Torres stood behind a podium, looking exhausted and defeated, as he announced that the investigation was shifting into a long-term mode. The sisters had been missing for 240 hours, and there were no solid leads. Margaret Decker sat in the front row, her face etched with a grief that would never fully heal. She had spent 10 days believing that her daughters would be found alive. Now she was being told that the search was just beginning. 3 weeks after Emily and Natalie Decker vanished, something unexpected happened. A local high school student named Jessica Martinez posted a photo of the sisters on her Instagram account with a simple caption, "Help bring our friends home, share if you care, #FindTheDeckers." Within 24 hours, that hashtag had been shared over 10,000 times. Within a week, it had reached 500,000 people across social media platforms. The Decker sisters case had gone viral. The power of social media to amplify missing persons cases is both remarkable and terrifying. On one hand, it can spread awareness to millions of people who might have crucial information. On the other hand, it can create chaos, misinformation, and interference that actually hinders real investigations. #FindTheDeckers became a rallying cry for people across the country who had never heard of Milford, Illinois. Celebrities began sharing the story. News outlets picked up the viral momentum. Within 2 weeks, the case that had been struggling for local attention was suddenly making national headlines. CNN sent a news crew to Milford. Fox News interviewed Detective Torres. NBC ran a special segment about the sisters during their evening broadcast. The small town that had never seen a traffic jam suddenly had media vans parked on every corner. The psychological impact of sudden fame on a grieving family cannot be overstated. Margaret and Robert Decker went from private citizens dealing with personal tragedy to public figures whose every word was analyzed and criticized. They were thrust into a spotlight they never wanted while still processing the most devastating experience of their lives. The first candlelight vigil drew over 2,000 people to the town square. Community members joined hands with strangers who had driven hundreds of miles to show support. The sight of thousands of candles flickering in the darkness was both beautiful and heartbreaking. It demonstrated the incredible capacity for human compassion in times of crisis. But the viral attention also brought unwanted consequences. Amateur investigators began flooding social media with theories, accusations, and wild speculation. Some claimed the sisters had been kidnapped by a human trafficking ring. Others suggested they had run away to start new lives. The most disturbing theories accused family members of being involved in their disappearance. Drop a comment below. Do you think social media helps or hurts missing person cases? Because what happened next in the Decker case shows both sides of this digital double-edged sword. The online conspiracy theories began affecting the real investigation. Detective Torres received hundreds of tips daily, most of them based on internet rumors rather than actual evidence. His small team was overwhelmed trying to sort legitimate leads from social media noise. One particularly damaging theory suggested that Robert Decker had killed his daughters and buried them on his property. The accusation was based on nothing more than someone's interpretation of his body language during a television interview. But it spread like wildfire online, forcing police to waste valuable resources investigating the girl's own father. The psychological analysis of social media mob mentality reveals how quickly public opinion can turn against innocent people. Without evidence, without facts, without due process, thousands of strangers decided Robert Decker was guilty of murdering his own children. The family's grief became public entertainment. Their pain was dissected, analyzed, and judged by people who had never met them. Every photograph, every interview, every public appearance was scrutinized for hidden meanings that existed only in the imaginations of online detectives. Margaret Decker stopped leaving her house except for grocery shopping and medical appointments. The woman who had once been active in every community event now lived like a prisoner in her own home, afraid to face the stares and whispers of strangers who thought they knew her story. The life lesson here is profound. The power of public attention can be both a blessing and a curse. While social media helped keep the sisters' story alive when local interest was fading, it also created new forms of trauma for a family already suffering unimaginable loss. But fame came with a dark price that would haunt the Decker family for years to come. The very tool that was supposed to help find Emily and Natalie had become another source of pain in their parents' endless nightmare. The viral hashtag that started with hope had transformed into a weapon of mass speculation, turning a missing persons case into a public trial where everyone was guilty until proven innocent. Time moves differently when someone you love is missing. Minutes feel like hours, days blur together, years pass in a haze of hollow anniversaries and broken promises that tomorrow will bring answers. For Margaret Decker, the first year after her daughters disappeared was a masterclass in human endurance. She maintained their bedrooms exactly as they had left them. Emily's textbooks still lay open on her desk. Natalie's camera equipment remained organized on her dresser. Their clothes hung unwashed in closets, still carrying faint traces of their perfume. Margaret would sit in those empty rooms for hours, running her fingers over homework assignments that would never be completed, holding photographs that would never be developed. The psychological term for this behavior is called complicated grief, a condition where normal mourning becomes stuck, unable to progress toward acceptance because there is no body to bury, no funeral to attend, no closure to embrace. The physical toll on Margaret was devastating. She lost 37 pounds in the first 6 months. Her hair began falling out from stress. She developed chronic insomnia, lying awake night after night listening for car doors that never slammed, footsteps that never climbed the stairs, voices that never called out that they were home. Dr. Patricia Williams, the family physician who had delivered both Emily and Natalie 20 years earlier, watched Margaret's health deteriorate with growing alarm. She prescribed sleeping pills, antidepressants, and anxiety medication, but no prescription could heal the wound that festered in Margaret's soul. Robert dealt with his grief differently. He threw himself into work, pulling double shifts at the grain elevator to avoid coming home to a house that echoed with memories. He stopped talking about the girls, except when absolutely necessary. He built emotional walls that protected him from hope, because hope had become too dangerous to bear. The psychological analysis of families dealing with missing loved ones reveals a disturbing pattern. Post-traumatic stress disorder develops in over 60% of parents whose children disappear. Chronic depression affects nearly 80%. Divorce rates climb to over 70%, as couples process their trauma in incompatible ways. The Decker marriage survived, but barely. There were months when Margaret and Robert became strangers living in the same house, each drowning in their own version of hell, unable to comfort each other because their own pain was too overwhelming. The community of Milford tried to heal and move forward, but some wounds never fully close. The annual Corn Festival continued, but it felt hollow without Emily organizing the children's activities. The community center still hosted volunteer events, but they carried the weight of what had happened in that parking lot. Anniversary reactions became brutal annual traditions. October 15th marked not just the day the sisters disappeared, but the day Margaret's world ended. Every year, she would wake up reliving that terrible night. Every year, she would receive flowers and cards from well-meaning neighbors who had no idea that their kindness was salt in wounds that refused to heal. Birthdays became days of mourning. Emily's birthday in March brought visions of the cake that would never be baked, the celebration that would never happen. Natalie's birthday in June carried dreams of graduation photos that would never be taken, college plans that would never be fulfilled. Christmas was the cruelest month of all. Margaret continued buying presents for daughters who would never unwrap them. She set places at the dinner table for children who would never come home. She maintained traditions for a family that existed only in photographs and memories. The mental health impact extended far beyond the Decker household. Children in Milford developed anxiety about leaving their homes alone. Parents became overprotective, afraid to let their own daughters out of sight. The town's sense of safety had been shattered, replaced by a constant awareness that terrible things could happen to good people for no reason at all. Local councillor Michael Thompson reported a 300% increase in clients seeking therapy for anxiety, depression, and trauma-related disorders in the 5 years following the disappearance. The Decker case had created ripples of psychological damage that spread through the entire community like a stone thrown into still water. The life lesson here is critical. Supporting families of missing persons requires long-term commitment, not just immediate sympathy. These families need practical help with daily tasks, emotional support that continues for years, and most importantly, they need people who will not give up hope when the media attention fades away. By year 7, Margaret had stopped giving interviews. By year 8, she rarely left the house except for medical appointments. By year 9, she had accepted that her daughters were probably dead, even though accepting that reality felt like betraying their memory. The 10th anniversary arrived with crushing finality. Margaret stood in her kitchen, staring at a calendar that marked a decade of unanswered questions. 10 years of waiting for a phone call that never came. 10 years of hoping for a miracle that seemed increasingly impossible. She had reached the deepest point of despair. That valley where hope goes to die, and acceptance becomes the only way to survive another day. Then, after nearly a decade, everything changed in a single phone call. This is the call that changed everything. On a Tuesday morning in March 2024, Margaret Decker was folding laundry in her kitchen when her phone rang. She almost did not answer it. After 10 years of disappointment, she had learned to expect nothing from unexpected calls. But something made her pick up that phone. Something made her say hello to the voice that would finally give her the answers she had been praying for. Mrs. Decker, this is Detective Sarah Chen with the Illinois State Police. I am calling about your daughter's case. We have had a breakthrough. Margaret's knees buckled. The laundry basket fell to the floor, spilling clothes across the linoleum. For 10 years, she had imagined this moment. For 10 years, she had rehearsed what she would say when this call finally came. But when it actually happened, she could not speak. Mrs. Decker, are you there? We found him. We found the person responsible for taking Emily and Natalie. The science behind this breakthrough reads like something from a Hollywood movie, but it is absolutely real. In the past decade, forensic technology has advanced at an incredible pace. What was impossible in 2014 became routine by 2024. The Illinois State Police had reopened the Decker case as part of their cold case initiative, focusing specifically on cases where DNA evidence had been collected but never fully analyzed. They partnered with Parabon Nanolabs, a company that specializes in advanced genetic genealogy techniques. Remember that single drop of blood found on Emily's jacket? The drop that had been dismissed as too small and too degraded to be useful. That microscopic sample was about to solve the entire case. Traditional DNA analysis requires relatively large, high-quality samples to create a usable profile, but new extraction techniques can now build genetic profiles from samples so small they are barely visible to the naked eye. Scientists can now recover DNA from evidence that was written off as useless 15 years ago. The psychological impact of scientific breakthroughs on cold cases cannot be overstated. For investigators, it represents validation that their work was not in vain. For families, it represents hope that justice is still possible even when all seems lost. For society, it demonstrates that no crime is too old to solve when science and determination work together. The blood sample from Emily's jacket yielded a partial DNA profile. Not enough for traditional identification methods, but enough for genetic genealogy. This revolutionary technique compares crime scene DNA to public genealogy databases, looking for family connections that can lead investigators to potential suspects. The process is complex but fascinating. Scientists upload the DNA profile to databases like GEDmatch, where millions of people have voluntarily shared their genetic information for family research. The system searches for matches, not just direct hits, but distant relatives who share common ancestors with the unknown suspect. Dr. Jennifer Morrison, the lead geneticist on the case, spent 3 months building family trees from the DNA matches. She traced bloodlines back generations, following genetic breadcrumbs through marriages, divorces, adoptions, and geographic relocations. She was essentially solving a massive puzzle where each piece was a person and each connection was a family relationship. The breakthrough came when Morrison identified a fourth cousin match in the database. From that single connection, she was able to build a family tree that narrowed down potential suspects to fewer than 12 individuals. Then came the painstaking work of eliminating possibilities based on age, location, and criminal history. One name kept rising to the top of the list. One person who fit every parameter. One individual whose life history aligned perfectly with the timeline of the Decker sisters' disappearance. The name that appeared on that screen would shock everyone involved in the investigation. Marcus Edward Hoffman, age 43. A drifter with a criminal record spanning multiple states, a man who had been questioned during the initial investigation but quickly dismissed because he had no apparent connection to the sisters or the community. But genetic genealogy does not lie. The DNA evidence proved that Marcus Hoffman had been at that community center on the night Emily and Natalie disappeared. His blood was on Emily's jacket, linking him directly to the crime scene. The revelation sent shockwaves through the investigative team. Detective Torres, who had worked the case for 10 years, sat in stunned silence as the evidence was presented. Marcus Hoffman had been hiding in plain sight for a decade, living under different names in different states, confident that his crimes would never catch up to him. But he had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated the power of science to preserve truth even when human memory fails. The psychological analysis of this breakthrough reveals something powerful about human nature. We want to believe that evil cannot hide forever. We want to believe that justice will eventually prevail. And sometimes, just sometimes, that belief is vindicated by the relentless march of scientific progress. The life lesson here is profound. Never give up on justice, even when hope seems lost. The tools we have today to solve crimes are more powerful than anything previous generations could have imagined. Cases that seemed impossible 15 years ago are being solved with techniques that sound like science fiction. For Margaret Decker, that phone call represented more than just a breakthrough in her daughter's case. It represented proof that love and determination can overcome even the most sophisticated attempts to hide the truth. Marcus Edward Hoffman thought he had committed the perfect crime. He thought 10 years of silence meant he was safe. He was wrong. Science had finally caught up with evil, and justice was about to be served. Marcus Edward Hoffman was a ghost who had learned to live among the living. For 43 years, he had perfected the art of being forgettable, unremarkable, and invisible. He was the kind of man who could work beside you for months without you remembering his name. He was the neighbor who never made noise, never caused trouble, and never drew attention to himself. But beneath that carefully constructed facade lived a predator who had been hunting for decades. The criminal history that emerged from police databases painted a disturbing portrait of escalating violence. Hoffman's first arrest was in 1998 for voyeurism in Kentucky. He had been caught photographing women through apartment windows. The charges were reduced to a misdemeanor, and he served 6 months in county jail. 2 years later, he was arrested in Tennessee for attempted kidnapping. A college student reported that a man matching his description had approached her in a parking lot, claiming her car had a flat tire. When she refused his help, he grabbed her arm and tried to force her toward his vehicle. She escaped, but Hoffman disappeared before police could locate him. The psychological analysis of serial predators reveals a chilling pattern. They begin with minor offenses, testing boundaries and learning from their mistakes. Each crime teaches them how to be more careful, more cunning, and more dangerous. They evolve like viruses, adapting to avoid detection while their appetites grow stronger. By 2005, Hoffman had perfected his methods. He learned to change his appearance, his name, and his location regularly. He worked temporary jobs that paid in cash. He rented rooms from people who did not ask questions. He became a master of reinvention, leaving no paper trail that could connect his crimes across state lines. The timeline reconstruction revealed how methodically he had stalked Emily and Natalie Decker. Phone records showed he had been in Milford for 3 weeks before their disappearance, staying at a motel under a false name. Surveillance footage from local businesses captured him watching the community center, learning the volunteers' schedules, identifying his targets. He had been studying the sisters, like a scientist studies lab rats. He knew when they arrived, when they left, and most importantly, he knew they always worked alone in the storage room during the final hour of each volunteer session. The community's reaction to these revelations was a mixture of relief and horror. Relief that the mystery was finally solved, horror that such evil had been walking among them undetected. Neighbors remembered seeing Hoffman at the local diner, at the gas station, at the hardware store. He had been hiding in plain sight for weeks, and nobody had suspected anything. Margaret Decker experienced emotions she could not fully process. Joy that her daughter's killer had been identified. Rage that he had lived freely for 10 years while her family suffered. Guilt that she felt grateful to finally have someone to blame for her loss. The human mind struggles to hold such contradictory feelings simultaneously. The life lesson here is terrifying but crucial. Predators are experts at camouflage. They do not look like monsters. They look like ordinary people. They know how to smile, how to make small talk, how to blend into communities without raising suspicion. The most dangerous criminals are often the ones who seem the most normal. But the investigation also revealed Hoffman's critical weakness, his compulsion to take trophies from his victims. Police obtained a search warrant for his current residence in Ohio and discovered a collection that would haunt investigators for years to come. Jewelry, photographs, and personal items from at least 7 different women across multiple states. Emily's class ring was found in a shoebox under his bed. Natalie's camera strap was wrapped around a lamp in his living room. These were not random murders. These were carefully planned abductions by someone who derived pleasure from collecting mementos of his victims' suffering. The DNA evidence that had led to his identification was just the beginning. Each item in his trophy collection represented another family somewhere in America who deserved answers about their missing daughter, sister, or mother. Detective Chen realized they were not just solving the Decker case. They were opening the door to a multi-state investigation that could potentially close dozens of cold cases. Hoffman was not just a killer. He was a serial predator who had been operating for over 2 decades. But this was just the beginning of discovering the truth about what had happened to Emily and Natalie Decker on that October night. The physical evidence proved Hoffman was responsible for their disappearance, but it did not reveal the full horror of their final hours or the location of their remains. The family's decade-long nightmare was ending, but their search for complete closure was just beginning. The arrest of Marcus Edward Hoffman marked more than just the end of a decade-long investigation. It marked the beginning of a transformation that would reshape Milford and influence law enforcement practices across the entire state of Illinois. Within 6 months of the breakthrough, the Illinois State Police announced the creation of the Decker Sisters Cold Case Initiative, a specialized unit dedicated to using advanced genetic genealogy techniques to solve unsolved disappearances and murders. The program was funded through a combination of state resources and private donations from community members who wanted to honor Emily and Natalie's memory. The psychological process of community healing is complex and deeply personal. For 10 years, Milford had lived under a shadow of fear and uncertainty. Children had grown up afraid to walk alone after dark. Parents had become overprotective, cancelling sleepovers and restricting their teenagers' freedom. The entire town had adapted to living with the constant awareness that evil could strike without warning. But the identification of Hoffman allowed the community to finally process their trauma in a healthy way. The fear had a face now. The unknown had become known. The monster was no longer hiding in the shadows of their imagination. Dr. Patricia Williams, who had watched Margaret Decker's health deteriorate over the past decade, noted a remarkable change in her patients after the arrest. Anxiety levels decreased, sleep patterns improved, people began venturing out after dark again. The community was learning to trust the world again, one small step at a time. The breakthrough did more than solve a case. It demonstrated the incredible power of scientific advancement to bring closure to families who had given up hope. News of the genetic genealogy success spread throughout the region, inspiring other families with missing loved ones to request that their cases be reopened using the same techniques. The Milford Community Center, where Emily and Natalie had spent their final hours, was renamed the Decker Sisters Memorial Center. The building was renovated with state-of-the-art security systems and surveillance equipment. It became a symbol of how tragedy can be transformed into positive change when communities refuse to let evil have the final word. Local schools began teaching programs about personal safety, digital forensics, and the importance of scientific evidence in solving crimes. Students learned about DNA analysis, database searches, and the career opportunities available in forensic science. Several teenagers from Milford have since pursued degrees in criminal justice and forensic science, directly inspired by the resolution of the sisters' case. The life lesson here is profound. Tragedy can catalyze positive change when communities channel their grief into meaningful action. The pain of loss can become the foundation for progress if people choose to honor their loved ones through service to others. Technology played a crucial role in bringing justice to the Decker family, but it was human determination that made the difference. Detective Chen could have given up on a 10-year-old case. The genetic genealogy experts could have moved on to easier assignments. The Illinois State Police could have prioritized newer investigations. But they did not give up. They understood that every family deserves answers, no matter how long those answers take to find. Today, the Decker Sisters Cold Case Initiative has solved 17 additional cases across Illinois. 17 families have received the closure that was denied to them for years or even decades. The ripple effects of Emily and Natalie's case continue to bring hope to people who thought they would never see justice. Margaret Decker now volunteers with the initiative, sharing her story with other families and advocating for continued funding of cold case investigations. Her decade of suffering has become a source of strength for others walking the same difficult path. The story of Emily and Natalie Decker teaches us 4 life lessons that could save lives and bring justice to families still waiting for answers. First, trust your instincts about safety. Margaret Decker knew within 30 minutes that something was wrong when her daughters did not come home. She did not make excuses. She did not wait for morning. She acted on her maternal instincts immediately. That quick response preserved crucial evidence that would eventually solve the case 10 years later. Second, support families of missing persons with long-term commitment, not just immediate sympathy. These families need practical help, emotional support, and most importantly, people who will not give up hope when the media attention fades away. Margaret Decker survived her darkest decade because neighbors continued bringing meals, friends continued checking on her, and her community refused to let her face her grief alone. Third, never underestimate the power of community action. The hashtag #FindTheDeckers reached millions of people. The candlelight vigils kept the story alive. The volunteer search efforts demonstrated that ordinary citizens can make extraordinary differences when they work together toward justice. Fourth, science and persistence can overcome time itself. The single drop of blood that solved this case was dismissed as useless for nearly a decade, but advances in genetic genealogy turned that microscopic sample into the key that unlocked the entire mystery. No case is too old to solve when determination meets technology. The psychological reflection on human resilience revealed through this case is remarkable. Margaret Decker endured 10 years of uncertainty that would have broken most people. She faced public scrutiny, false accusations, and crushing disappointment, but she never stopped fighting for her daughters. She never stopped believing that truth would eventually emerge. Her resilience became the foundation for helping 17 other families find closure through the cold case initiative that bears her daughters' names. Pain became purpose, suffering became service, Grief became a gift to others walking the same difficult path. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with families who have missing loved ones. Share it with people who work in law enforcement. Share it with anyone who believes that justice is worth fighting for, no matter how long that fight takes. But here is something that will surprise you. As I was preparing this documentary, I received word that Marcus Edward Hoffman has agreed to cooperate with investigators. He is providing information about the locations of his other victims, finally giving closure to families across multiple states who have been waiting decades for answers. The ripple effects of solving the Decker sisters' case continue to bring hope to people who thought they would never see justice. Emily and Natalie's legacy lives on through every case solved, every family reunited with truth, and every community that refuses to let evil have the final word. Their story reminds us that love is stronger than fear, that truth is more powerful than lies, and that justice may be delayed but it will never be denied. Emily and Natalie Decker wanted to change the world through compassion. 10 years after their death, they are still changing the world, one solved case at a time.